Welcome back to Hot Rod Guy Garage. Today we got another video on the 71 Torino, so follow me on through the intro and I'll be back. So, alright guys, when I test drove this thing yesterday to make sure it was running good, I noticed there was some noises in the front end and it kind of felt, for lack of better terms, like the brakes were dragging on it. So, let's do a little exploring and see what we can find out under this car. So guys, we're going to start up here at the front and we're just going to kind of visualize what we see. And I've already shook the front end down. We have quite a bit of front end play in this car. But one thing I noticed is you can't hardly turn any of these wheels on this car, front or rear. So they did install this brake kit. I'm going to do a bolt check for them out of courtesy. But the first thing I really noticed on this car, and I'll have to shed a little extra light here on this situation, if you look at how many threads are sticking out of that strut rod right there, and you look at how many threads are sticking out of this one, it tells me that the alignment is really screwed up on this car. So whoever done the alignment on it sure did not know anything about classic Fords. It does need a set of sway bar end links. It looks like it's got the original ball joints in it. I'm going to shed a little light up in here. The lower control arm bushings are beat out of it on both sides. That's more than likely the popping sound I was hearing. Over here, we got more of the same and more of the same up in there. It's got a new tie rod end on this side, but it's never been greased. The boot's flat and the fitting's dry. Somebody's put a new control valve on it, but as you see, it's dry rotted. They didn't put a grease fitting in it, and that's bad, because you'll wear this pivot ball and stuff in here. That grease actually helps take out some of the slack in that hydraulic cylinder. They put a new slave cylinder on the power steering, and I don't know if you can see, but they're cross-threaded in and installed them properly. As you can see, that power steering hose right there is about to blow out due to that. It has the original tie rod end over here. It's got some play in it. The inner tie rod end, the boot's gone, and it's got a little play. This inner tie rod end's gone. It's got some play. The idler arm on it is shot. So these idler arm, inner and outer tie rod ends on both sides. Lower control arms, I guarantee you it needs uppers put in it too, because the cross shafts are probably wore out in it. The transmission pan's leaking a little bit, and it's leaking around the band adjuster nut. The kickdown linkage, it's not in the valve body in the transmission. And the lever's on backwards. Other than that, you know, I mean, it's pretty much stock. Just whoever done work before on the front end stuff didn't do a good job. It's got a new transmission mount in it. Tail shaft seal's leaking back here. The car's good and solid underneath. It's a little muddy, a little dirt. Mud, but it looks good and solid. It looks like it's got a set of Flowmaster mufflers on it. It's got a new recent set of air shocks. Rear U-joint's been replaced. It's got a grease fitting. And as is typical with a small block Torino, it has an 8-inch rear end in it. You can tell an 8-inch from a 9-inch because you can get a socket on your bottom bolt here and this second bolt. You use socket, take off an 8-inch center section. On 9-inch, you gotta use a wrench on these two right here. So, some booger exhaust welds. It needs some leaf spring bushings. It needs some shackle bushings. I don't know if you can see them up in there. They're rotten. And these right here, when they you start seeing them like this, more likely this leaf spring's about rotted in two in here. I personally had several sets of these break. So if this was my car, I would put a new set of leaf springs on it. I would put a new set of bushings on it. And a new set of shackle bushings back here. The rear rubber brake line has been replaced. It looks like it's in good shape. Looks like it's had wheel cylinders put on it in the back. But we do have some leakage back here. And we need to see what that is, whether it's brake fluid or gear oil. More than likely gear oil, because it would be common. This side's dry. So pretty much normal stuff, guys, normal maintenance-y things. Let's see, play in the steering right there. And one thing I failed to mention, we can't miss the column shifter linkage right here is missing the bushing that goes in the linkage rod. I know it's gonna be hard to see, but it's gone. Once again, normal stuff from these cars. And I don't know if you can see the strut rod bushings. These were supposed to have been replaced. They're dry rotted pretty bad, and we have a leak coming from the power steer retard line. It has the wrong size line on it and the wrong composition of hose. That thing is swollen and very, 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 very soft. That's a problem waiting to happen. This transmission cooler line right here is kinked off. That is going to overheat the transmission, burn transmission up if it's not addressed. But other than that, the car's good and solid underneath. It still has its factory paint markings on the insides of the fenders. Got a little mud up there at the top. I don't really see a whole lot of rot. The battery tray area is super solid in it, along with your strut rod cross member. So he's going to have quite a list of things to fix on this car before it is safe to drive any kind of distance. Like, it's pretty bad when you really think about it. It pretty much needs whole front end rebuilt. Even though they've rebuilt the power steering system, it needs to be rebuilt again because they didn't do the job right. And once again, that was another local shop that done this. And I seen the bill. It's also landing pressure seat. It was quite ridiculous for what they charged. Maybe I don't charge enough money for the work I do, I guess. Maybe my quality's too high for, you know. It's pretty sad. So alright guys, I put a little light so it's going to be a little shaded in some places for you guys. But what we need to do, I need to take a micrometer here. I need to measure the depth of the inside of this master cylinder to its mating flange in here. So this need to come down to here. And it looks like we got 1.611 is the depth. And that depth will be from our inner surface in here to the tip of this rod. So I'm going to lock our micrometer down, and then I'm going to measure from in here to the rod end, and it looks like we have yeah, a lot. I don't know if you can see it right there, but pretty much the whole nub, there it goes in the back of the master cylinder, is pretty much this needs to be even with where the nut's at back there. And that's putting like you're holding a quarter of the brake pedal down on it. So that's super bad. So let's see if we can't do a little adjustment here and get that straightened out for him. All right. So what we need to do here is we need to get this apart. That might be hard. Because it seems like it's way awful tight. Let's screw this thing out. All the way. And we'll have to remove the lock nut here, which isn't a scary thing. We can it's not going to unscrew, and I'll Loctite this thing, but what we need to do is screw this thing in and see if we can't get our depth measurement again. See if it'll go in far enough for that. There's 1.611, so let's get our mic back to that point. Measure off in here. It's pretty close. I'm probably going to have to trim the threads off in here a little bit because it does bottom all the way out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to chuck this up there in my vise. I'm not going to bring you along for that. And I'm just going to take my angle grinder with a cutoff wheel, and I'm just going to buzz a little bit off this, and then I'll be back. Well, I changed my mind here. Before I do anything, I went ahead and took the rear pivot out of this thing just to make sure that this didn't have pressure, because there's an adjustable clevis on the backside too, because this is an aftermarket setup, and when I pulled that clevis out, that rod shot all the way back and hit the firewall. So I need to make sure that's not run all the way out too, because that will push this out too far also. So I'm going to pull this brake booster back off. It's just 4 bolts, not a real big deal. They're real easy to get to. So I'm going to pull this brake booster off and make sure. Alright, so I got the brake booster off, and what I need to do, I need to kind of measure. I made sure the pedal was at a proper height inside the car. And I just want to kind of get a rough measurement here from the center of that pivot to the brake booster mounting flange. And I have about 4 inches right there. So we need to check our power brake booster pivot and see how far it's sticking out of the back of the booster. And as you can see, we're over here on the bench now. I think we're well over 4 inches from this mounting flange to here. And that's quite the, yeah, we're at 6 inches. So this is going to have to go in quite a bit. What also I need to do is, this is spring loaded, so there's a point where this diaphragm pushes on this other rod. So I need to make sure that this rod is back all the way in the booster, and I need to take this and push it in until it bottoms out, and then I need to remeasure it. And we're still at 5 inches, so this thing's going to go in quite a bit. That right there is the whole source of 90% of his brake problems right here. So let me grab a wrench to break this loose, and we'll see how much adjustment we can get out of this. This is the thing with aftermarket brake stuff, guys. You got to make sure that this stuff is correct and make sure it's safe. So we need 1 inch. And before I start cutting on anything, I want to see how much adjustment we have here. And it looks like I can get 1 inch, possibly. I don't know if our clevis is going to be long enough. We may have to do our trimming here. once again, this is not going to be a situation where you absolutely have to have a lock nut, but you definitely got to have the right adjustment, because it can't turn and won't turn once the clevis is in it. And if you were scared about it backing out, you could always Loctite this. But what I want to do, I'm going to run that all the way down as far as it'll go, and I don't think it's going to make that much difference. No, about a 1/4 inch difference from where it was. So I'm going to have to trim the booster side here and shorten this area right here to make this length correct, so the power brake booster works properly. Alright, so I got that cut off. I just use my angle grinder and cut it. I do believe we're not going to have room for the lock nut, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to Loctite this pivot. What that'll do is just ensure that even though this will not back off with the clevis in it, it will ensure, and if we have enough room, I'll pull it back off and put the lock nut back on it. But I put this same kit on my 71 Torino, and I didn't have near the issues he had out of it. This is just the cheap eBay kit. I mean, it's nothing fancy, but mine's been on my car for over 6 years at this point, and I never had a bit of issue out of it. It's been a great little setup for the money. So it's gonna get us pretty close right there. So I'm just gonna make sure, grab this again with my little pliers here. Try to get the max amount out of that I can. I got up under the dash and made sure where our pedal should be, and I end up adding about a 1/4 inch to our measurement. So it's 4 1/4 to the pivot, so that's 4 1/4 to the pivot. So we should be ready to put the brake booster back on it. Then we can remeasure everything and make sure everything's correct. And at this point, I got my chronometer still set to where it was before. This is the depth of the mass cylinder on the inside. And as you can see, our rod is quite a bit further back. I can stick my finger in between it now. So that's a good thing, guys. So now we didn't have to cut off the little part of the rod. And now everything's not in a bind, so that's great too. So we can adjust this rod correctly at this point. That's the thing with anything aftermarket, you need to make sure that everything, even if you're just using an old bent coat hanger to check this stuff, guys, you need to make sure everything is in the proper positions. So I want to lock this down, and let me grab my little pliers. Just to hold this, just to lock this nut down. sure it's good and tight. I want to double check my measurement in here. Looks like we're still good. So when I put this master cylinder on here, I shouldn't have any kind of pressure on it whatsoever. And if I do, we've messed the measurement up somewhat. But other than the brake lines, we don't have no pressure here. So that's good. And anytime you make a brake line for this stuff, guys, you should put a coil in both lines. And that will make, if you ever have to do something like this, it'll make it easier to pull the master cylinder off. And the little coils they put in brake lines from the factory, and Ford, GM, Dodge, all of them done it, is to keep vibrations from fracturing your brake line fittings. So get this master cylinder snugged up here, and then we'll raise this car back up and make sure that our wheels will still turn. Alright, car's off the ground. Let's see if our wheels are locked up now. Nope, they spin free. So success there. I need to put the brake booster vacuum line back in. I guarantee it's going to feel like it's got power brakes now too, instead of the brake pedal being super hard in it. So let me do that and then I'll be back. So alright, at this point I got all the power brake stuff wrapped up. I went under the dash and straightened out some stuff under there too. It didn't have a pedal stop on it. The bushing for the rod to the brake pedal was missing. Luckily I had this 70 Torino parts car, the rock box car. I went and robbed all that stuff out of it for him and put it in there. So all that stuff's put together correctly now and should be good and safe. So now I'm back here at the rear brakes, and I got the rear wheels off of it and drums off so I can have a look and see what was wet on the driver's side rear. So let me flip around and I'll show you both sides of the brakes and what to check for if you have some wetness at your wheels. So I know it's a little dark on video, guys, but this is what your rear brakes are going to look like when you get your brake drum off. It should slide off. If it doesn't, you might have to go in through the hole in your backing plate and reverse this wheel to take adjustment out of the brakes. The brake shoes on this look brand new. I mean, not brand new, but in very good serviceable shape. Somebody's replaced the wheel cylinders, and what you do when you check these, you'll just pull these little boots back with your fingers and make sure there's no wetness. This side is in real good shape. It was the other side that we had the wetness, so we'll go over there now. Alright, this side's a little brighter because we're on the window side. As you can see, the brakes, like I said, they look pretty new. So if you look right here, we have wetness, and that wetness is coming out of this boot right here. So this new wheel cylinder has failed. As you can see, the fluid right there. That's something he's going to have to address very soon. If that blows all the way out, he's going to lose his brake pedal. But that's been running down the backing plate, and that's all the wetness I seen down there at the back. So definitely needs a driver's side wheel cylinder. So at this point, I'm going to put the rear brake drums back on it. I might do a little tweaking on the adjustment, get those back on, get his rear wheels back on. And we really need to get this exhaust manifold gasket on this car today. So let's get busy. And alright guys, we're going to start on the exhaust manifold gaskets. I done went down below and took the two 11/16 nuts off the exhaust pipe back there. This has been recently apart, so everything comes loose freely. I actually tightened those manifold bolts up because I heard the exhaust leak yesterday. Tightened them up, didn't 100% cure it. So I'm going to pull this manifold off and put a gasket on it. So I'm going to have to take the air cleaner off of it. We're going to pull the plug wires off this side. The engine lift hooks down there. And then we can go from there. I'm going to put you guys on time lapse as I take this thing apart. If there's anything I need to show you or anything important, I will come back and show you at that point. And I got the old gasket off and the old manifold off. As you can see our telltale right there. And this gasket was split right there. So that's where most of his exhaust leak was coming from. It was fixing to start leaking here and here where that manifold was loose. It had actually burnt the material out of it already. It just hadn't started penetrating. So anytime you have a classic car like this, guys, and the good thing is it looks like somebody has serviced these manifolds at one time. So more than likely they're good and flat, but you want to inspect this manifold really, really well. And you want to make sure that you don't have any kind of cracks in it or anything. And this looks like it is the factory manifold. It's a DO casting, which would be 70 casting, so it would be correct for 71. Can't really tell this, but it looks like an OM and an 8. So that's December the 3rd of 1970. You can see OM3. So M is December. So 3rd day of 1970, which would be correct for 71 and would be correct for a DOO casting number. So factory manifolds. So pretty cool. So now I'm going to take a piece of fine grit sandpaper on a long flat block. I'm going to clean this manifold up, just make sure it's flat and there's none of this little rust pitting from, you know, our manifold gasket right here. And we'll see if we can't find a new one to put on this thing. And I got the exhaust manifold cleaned up. It cleaned up with little resistance. I had a couple of gaskets up here, and the gasket set I had some leftovers from. And looks like these will work just fine for him. What you gotta watch, especially on Ford, small block Ford headers, add exhaust manifold gaskets. Some of your older stuff takes the exhaust manifold gasket like this, with the rounded ports. Some of your heads have square ports. So you need to make sure you put the appropriate gasket, because if you put the round port gasket on a square port manifold or square port head, you can see how little sealing area you have. And in these areas on the sides, it does overlap the port just a little bit. So you gotta make sure you have the correct gasket. Fortunately for him, I just happen to have some here at the shop. So let's get this exhaust manifold put back on there. So I'll put you back on big stand. Let's repeat this process where we took it off. And another thing I need to note, guys, you need to make sure the head is as clean as I clean that exhaust manifold too. Because if there's any old gasket on there, you put that new gasket on there and tighten it down, it's gonna bust. And also, if you're dealing with a stock manifold like this, you know, bolts, put your dab anti-seize on these things. It's not going to hurt anything. You're going to run this engine for a little while, then you can go back and retorque these bolts and make sure they're good and tight. So, let's get this manifold on the car. Our exhaust manifold's back installed. I'll still have to put the engine lift hook back on it, but I want to leave it off for now, but I can get back in there and make sure them bolts are tightened after we run it. But now I need to lift it up and look at this donut gasket. Oh, alright, I already got the car back up in there. As you see, pipes hanging here. They had just recently replaced this donut gasket, and I can already tell you this is not the correct donut gasket for this car. This is a hard donut gasket, and it's also thin. A Ford, the donut gasket on it is a little bit thicker and is made out of a softer material. This looks just like a steel spacer instead of a donut gasket. I'm pretty sure it's just a piece of steel. That is not the correct piece for this car. So guys, this would be the correct style donut gasket. This is a fiber gasket. And believe it or not, this one, even though it looks a little rough, it's still in real good shape. It's the only one I have here around the shop that is actually the correct donut gasket for this car instead of a, you know, a steel spacer. A steel spacer ain't gonna work in this application. The steel spacer style would work if it had a flange on this side, but that's not the way this is designed. This is designed for a double-sided fiber gasket to go in here and tighten down and pinches down. with this flange, which is also not the factory flange. But it's got to be some kind of a soft material in order to seal. If you put a piece of steel in here, it's never going to seal off. And as you can see on the piece of steel, on this one, it still had quite a few exhaust leaks around it. This would have probably worked if I had dolled it up with a little copper silicone, because the leaks seem minor, but the flanges, they're not perfect, guys, and you really need to use a fiber style like this. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit, clean the manifold and the pipe up, and I'm going to see if this one will seal off in this car. So I wire brushed the exhaust manifold up there. I wire brushed this flange. I put just a little small coat of ultra copper on the inside. I just put a little thin coat on the outside right here, and that's just going to help this form to any of the abnormalities in this old flange right here on the pipe and to the manifold itself up in the car up in there. Note, okay, if you use a high temp silicone like what I just done, it is not a replacement for a bad gasket. It is not there to fix a bad problem. I only put a thin coat on this because the only thing I have here at the shop is a used gasket, but it was in good shape. It just was a little ugly. It's in good shape. It was in serviceable condition. It come off a car I 100% knew didn't have an exhaust leak on that gasket. So I just put a little extra copper on there just in case. It should be fine. Other things to note, when you do something like this, you need to let it dry 100%. This car will need to sit possibly overnight. I probably won't let it sit overnight because I'm going to start it up as soon as I put this thing back together. If it goes together the way I think it will, and it should compress into the manifold good and tight. And if it compresses good and tight, I will know that the ultra copper isn't really doing anything and the gasket itself has done the seal. And that donut gasket actually compressed about 3.5 turns once I get it snugged down. So I feel pretty good about it. At least it's got the proper donut gasket inside the car now. So hopefully somebody will learn something from that too. If good parts store get you a donut gasket, they hand you a metal one for Ford, laugh at them, hand it back to them. Tell them you need the fiber style. And they also make one that's kind of like, looks like a bonded steel wool. It works fine too. But there's no real magic to donut gaskets, guys. You just gotta have something other than a steel spacer, because that sure wouldn't gonna work. So I looked at the driver's side. It don't look like it's been off in a long time. I am gonna check it, make sure it's tight. The good thing is it don't have one of these metal gaskets in it, or it doesn't appear to be. So, you know, let me check it and then I'll be back. And alright guys, the other donut gasket was tight and it looks appropriate for the car. So the next thing I need to do, I need to pull the front bolt off this carburetor and check what jet sizes it does have in it. Because if you remember, I told you that this car was rich. It probably needs to go down 2 to 3 jet sizes to be ideal. When you brake torque this car up, it actually black smokes out the tailpipes. So that tells me it is super, super rich. And really this car does not need a performance style 4-barrel carburetor on it for as mild of an engine as this car has. A flat top, stock headed, 1 step above an RV cam, 308 cubic inch motor would be more suited with an annular booster 500 CFM carburetor. You could get away with an annular booster 600 CFM carburetor too, because of the improved signal. But with this is meant for something that has a little more compression, a little better head flow, and some other little small mods done to it. like headers or larger exhaust. This car still has a 2-inch exhaust on it. It's quite restrictive, even though it has Flowmaster mufflers on it. The exhaust manifolds kill off a bunch of power and torque too. So this is not an ideal unit for this car. If you want to even stick with the 600, an 1850 series Holley would be more calibrated for this car than this performance version. So let's get the bowl off this. I'm going to put you on time lapse. To take the bowl off, there's 4 screws up here at the front of the bowl. I'm going to take them loose, and there's a 5/8 fuel line right here, threaded fitting. You want to make sure you put towels down the intake. I have those handy already to catch any fuel that comes out of this. And hopefully we can save the bowl gasket. The secondary side of this, we cannot adjust the jetting. So we need to try to compensate here between both off the primary side. It being a vacuum secondary and it being a little oversized, the secondaries, even though this has a performance style spring and stuff in it, probably isn't opening until 4,500 or 5,000 RPM on this engine. So let's get this bowl off here and see what secrets hide inside. Alright, before we get jets, I want to show you this before it dries out. I don't know if you can see that milky look inside this bowl in here, but it's got quite a bit of residue in this carburetor, like that. I am not a fan of these polished bowls. More than likely, that's residue left from where it was tumble polished. That's what gives you this shiny finish on this zinc. Yeah, not real good. So I'm going to clean that out. Luckily the gasket come out with no issue, and it looks like it's good and reusable. So we'll reuse that gasket. I'll blow that out with a little brake cleaner. But before we get to the jets, I want to show you another thing that you should never do. Is put Teflon tape on your fuel lines. If this gets into up here and then gets into your needle seat, you will flood your carburetor over with quick order. This is a flared fitting. This is a tube nut. Requires no additional sealant. But like I thought, guys, that this carburetor was way rich. This is a 600 CFM carburetor with a 68 jet in it. For reference, a 68 jet would be more appropriate for a 750 CFM carburetor on a 302 through 308 cubic inch engine. Once again, a 750 would be way too big for a heavy street car like this one is. So I'm going to get my jet assortment out. I'm going to do a little math, figure out exactly how much fuel I need to pull out this thing, and then I'll be back. So I figure this thing to be about 6% too rich in fuel. So the general rule of thumb with Holley jet sizes, guys, like this 68, if I drop down to a 67, I'm losing about 1 to 1.5% of fuel. So ideally I probably need to be around a 64 to a 65. I'm going to see what I have here in my jet assortment. I got it down here in front of me. More than likely I will probably put a 64 in this car, just because it is a heavy car and I know it is mega rich and it's choked up, which is going to help it take a smaller jet. If it had a large exhaust and headers and, you know, a little more compression, a little more camshaft, the 68s that were in it would probably be somewhat okay, or it'd be pretty close. You know, it'd probably still be a little rich. So let's start pulling. I'm gonna pull, like I said, it's about 1 to 1.5% per jet size. So we're going anywhere from 4 to 6% less fuel flow through primaries. Sounds like a bunch. It's really not, guys. But it could take us from them really dark plugs to a very light tan plug. And that's where you get a lot of your fuel mileage from. And also need to pop the meter and block off and check the power valve and make sure what it's got in it. But you could be giving up as much as 30 horsepower in literally 2 to 4 jet sizes, if that makes any sense. So richer is not always better. They always say lean is mean, and that is the case. Lean is also dangerous if too lean. So I'm going to put some 64s in this car, and I will drive it tomorrow. It's raining and, you know, spitting sleet. It was like 80 degrees yesterday, and today it's like 40 something. So tomorrow it's supposed to be 80. So it'll be a good day to drive this car once again. Do a couple of little small pulls in it, and make sure that the jetting is correct. And also let that donut gasket dry overnight. And I decided I am going to go ahead and put a new bowl gasket on it, because I do have one here in my jet assortment. So let me flip it around. So as you can see, my jet assortment contains other things other than jets. It's usually something I take to the track with me on the carburetor car. That way I've got a few assortments of things that you may need. The jets are starting to get pretty thin in here. These things are pretty expensive to buy, but I do have a surplus of 64s, and I got a few 65s too. So if 64s end up being a little lean, I can go up to a 65. For reference, the quick fuel carburetor comes with 68s. An 1850 600 comes with 66s, and I know an 1850 is a little rich, so I'm going to step it down from the 1850 level to 64 and see what happens. So we've got our bowl out, I got our meter and block out, I cleaned it up too. I got our 64s put in it. It does have a 6.5 power valve in it. The meter and block gasket looks like it'll be okay to reuse. Like I said, I went ahead and put a new bowl gasket on it for him. So let's get that back on the car and see how it does. It already smells cleaner and seems to run better than it did before, and I just started it up. It's still the same day. I went ahead and started it up, let get a little heat in where I can adjust carburetor. Surprisingly, donut gasket isn't leaking, the exhaust manifold gasket isn't leaking. It's really good and exhaust leak free, except for some of the welds back here at the mufflers and pipe. If you noticed them early in this video, they were pretty poor, and there's quite a few exhaust leaks in those areas, but it's running pretty good. And I've still got to go back in here and touch that carburetor up once the car warms up, but it seems to be running pretty good. I did adjust the accelerator pump a little bit because it had a little hesitation when you first hit it. So I just took the slack out of it. So I'm going to let it sit here and warm up. I'm going to touch that carburetor up, and we'll go from there. So it's the next day. I got the air cleaner and everything back on it, the engine lift hook, and everything's sorted out. So this will be a cold start. I come in here, like I said, just put that stuff on, want to put it on, double check those exhaust manifold bolts after it cooled all the way down. That way, you know, you don't burn your fingers. And it is definitely cold this morning. It's probably in the 40s, low 40s. So we'll see how this thing fires up, and we'll go take it for a test drive here in a few. I just kicked it off high idle. As you can see, it's still very cold. Seems good and responsive. Well, it finally got up to operating temperature. And usually that's not my thing, but I want it to be good and warm because I'm going to run this thing a little hard. So I won't be able to pull the plug out of it, see how it's running under load. So this will give me a good idea. We're going to take it out to the main road this time instead of just driving around the neighborhood over here at the shop. Brakes definitely feel a lot better. The pedal's not super high, and it has some vacuum assist now. Transmission shifts out a lot better. Touch of hesitation when you first touch it, so might raise the front bowl level up a little bit and see if that don't address that. But it's right there at the transition. So, car runs out good. It feels like it's got a lot more power than what it had. So let's get it back to the shop here and we'll adjust this bowl level and see if that don't help our little bit of hesitation, because the bowls are a little low in it, and that'll affect the fuel draw on the main boosters in that transition circuit. So, all right, to adjust bowl level on these carburetors, you have a screw right here and a 5/8 hex right here. What you do with this car running, we're going to crack this screw loose. Counterclockwise raises the bowl level, clockwise lowers the bowl level, and I'm going to raise both these just a touch and see if they don't cure our hesitation. Another thing to note, this will have to be done with it running, so I always like to stick a towel in between right here just to keep any fuel spray directly off the distributor or any hot surfaces. So, got all that addressed. Let's go take this thing for another test drive and see what happens. So, it was done as I initially pulled out of the shop here, so let's see what happens here. So, hesitation's gone. So, let's go back to the main road and get a feel and see if it made any big difference. Then we'll come back and we'll pull a couple plugs out of it and have a look at them and make sure our jet change was proper. So I'm just going to manually shift it this time. That way I can run the RPMs up a little higher. That's impressive. I mean, for a 302, guys, this thing is very, very mild. I'm not saying it's fast, because it's not fast, but it's fast enough to be fun and enjoyed. And that's a big important thing with these cars. So, you know, not everything has to be a race car. You just want it fast enough you can enjoy it. And that's what's important. Alright, so I pulled the front two spark plugs out because those were the ones we had issues with. As you can see, we have a nice light, very, very light tan color to this plug. Our timing mark is a little low. So this plug may be just a touch hot for this engine. But what will happen here, this will give you, this is a very clean running engine at this point. The carbon around here is just from where we run it before. But I think the jetting's pretty much dead on. Some people would like them just a touch darker. And I know they probably look white in this video, but if you really, really look, they have a nice tan color to them. So I think we hit it dead on with our jet change. Our float bowl adjustment brought it up into that level where hesitation's gone. What I would like to see on this car at this point is a few little things to improve its performance. After driving this car and manually shifting it and kind of getting it up where it actually makes power, which is in the higher RPMs, the transmission left and drive short shifts probably, it don't have a tack in it, but it feels like about 4,000, 4,500 RPM, which would be about correct for a stock C4. I would like to see this motor shift out at probably in the 55 to 5,800 range. It does need a kick-down linkage installed. A little bigger exhaust and a set of headers would make a huge difference in this little setup, along with a better flowing air cleaner. But considering how original this car looks, I don't know if I would actually change the air cleaner assembly as much as maybe put this K&N air filter in it. But it seems like it's running pretty good and pretty clean. And I think I'm going to call that good, because, you know, it's a good running little old car. And I wasn't impressed with it at first, but we found the brakes dragging. We found a bunch of ignition problems, some carburetor problems, and it was super rich. So those changes alone have made a huge difference in the car. So let me get the plugs put back in this thing. I'm going to pull the back two out and see what they look like in the background. I don't assume they're going to look any different. Usually on a small block Ford, if you pull the corners out, it gives you a pretty good idea, because your center cylinders are going to be richer, and most of them are leaner towards the front and richer towards the back. So I'm going to pull the two rear plugs out of it, and that'll give me both extremes, and we'll go from there. Well, I went ahead and pulled the back two plugs out too. They look just like the front two, so looks like we've been successful here. It should get pretty decent fuel mileage. You shouldn't have no problem with it fouling out plugs or loading up. And the car performs very well for what it is. So there's only one thing left to do, guys, and that is to call it good. So guys, that's what we're going to call this video an end. So if you haven't yet, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends. If you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button, because it does help the channel grow. If you are a subscriber, I greatly appreciate you guys. I look forward to everybody's comments down below. So until next video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next one. Hey, you're still here? Yeah, I figured you were. So, yeah, I really like this whole car. And kind of the situation with it. This is a younger guy, and I myself have been in this situation where you got an old car. My 70 was my first car, and you know, I always tinkered with it. It's pretty much what I learned on, and figured all this stuff out along the way. So him and his dad had been tinkering with this car a little bit, so I figured this was just a good way I could kind of give back, so to say, or help them out. Unfortunately, I couldn't do this job for free, but pretty much everything you've seen in this video has been free. The first video, I addressed their concerns, and the second video, I pretty much done out of the kindness of my heart. Some of the bad stuff we've seen up underneath the car isn't detrimental. It is stuff that needs to be addressed pretty soon, especially that wheel cylinder on the rear. if it was mine, I would probably take this car straight home and change that wheel cylinder, and probably at very least right now put a set of lower control arms on it, and that'll get rid of some of the popping and banging in the front end. The rest of the stuff is pretty much normal wear and tear. It's just old car. Old cars need quite a bit of work and quite a bit of love, and sometimes you just gotta take your time, check everything, double check your work, and that's why I spend as much time in the brake system. I know I didn't video a whole lot of fixing the power disc brake stuff on the car, but it's the same kit I had on my 71, on the green 71. I kind of helped guide them along the way, and there was just still a few things that just wasn't quite right. And now it runs, drives, and stops pretty decent, other than the front end issues. And the wheel cylinder is going to become a bigger issue sooner than later. So, you know, a lot of you are on my channel for the classic Mustang stuff, but these cars are really where my passion is, and I really like this old car.